The idea being, again, this concept of someone, a donor supporting an organization. A lot of times you make a donation, you're actually not going to know what happens to the money you actually donated. So that's where I thought, okay, I'm in tech space, can I actually disrupt this space a little bit? So using technology, we are trying to create a transparent donation system where a person, when they make a contribution, they actually know how every cent of that contribution was used. And then they get an update from the organization that's taking care of animals with like an itemized list of these were the items that were purchased using your contribution, and this is how it was taken care of for supporting the animals.
Join me, Jeremy Swick, on Into the Unknown, a podcast that delves into the personal journeys, stories, and experiences of individuals across diverse professions. As a historian by trade, I firmly believe that our personal histories shape our present and offer valuable insights into our paths ahead. With that being said, let's get into it. On this episode of Into the Unknown, I am joined with a very special guest. Preethi, how are you doing today?
I'm well, Jeremy. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. I like to kick off the show and talk the importance of networking. How do we know each other?
I believe I've listened to some of your shows, of course, but I really got introduced to your show via Olivia Atkins. So that's how I guess I started listening.
Yeah, Olivia does such a great job of connecting people, and she was a guest on my show, and it's always just nice to see who she brings and who she recommends. I want to know a little bit more about you, that comic book issue origin story. Who are you?
Well, my name is Preeti. I'm originally from India. I moved to the US for higher education, and I've also been working here. But outside of my day job, I founded a nonprofit, and I currently manage that. The name of the nonprofit is called Befriend Cows. So, to give you a little bit of background, in India, at least a decade ago, you can actually see farm animals like cows in the streets, right? But then back then, I never really interacted with them as much. But when I moved here and I was actually going through a tough time 5 years ago, I had an emotional encounter with a rescued bull, and that's what kind of laid the seed for who I am today. I guess also, and also some of the passions and goals that I'm pursuing today.
You said you came to the United States for your education. How was that story? What brought you here besides the education?
Uh, well, it's the education was the only reason really, because I was pursuing a master's in computer science, and really I felt like coming here would expose me to like on the ground work, like understanding practically aspects of technology, and this is like several years ago, right? So AI wasn't so much of a like a really famous thing. It AI has existed for several decades now, but then um, my initial area focus was primarily in like security and trying to understand computer networks and so on. So
Growing up, was education important in your family, or was it something you kind of developed on your own?
oh, no, no. Education was definitely important, but I happened to be the first women in the family to have traveled overseas for higher education. So I think that way it was interesting, and that also, I guess, has helped shape me. I guess the experiences that I've had outside of my home country to understand that people can be of different cultural backgrounds and faith systems, and but at a very very basic level, all of us are divine beings housed in the body of a human. Right? But then our practices may vary, but that's got nothing to do with the most foundational concept like love and being kind to others, being grateful. And if you feel like someone has done wrong by you, at least like forgiving and like moving on with life. That I think also influenced my I guess my courage to get into a path of can I actually set up a nonprofit and manage it on my own, and face some of the challenges. Some of it I've been trying to overcome. Others, they are still like in front of me, and it's just that with time and how the universe is shaped. you tackle them and then try to move forward.
Preeti, I appreciate you said that. And one of the things you mentioned, you came to the United States for education, and you had mentioned computer and technology. Let's dig into a little bit more about how did that end up becoming a nonprofit?
Oh, they are actually not related at all. Although I think my skills and personality did trickle in. So in my day job, I'm more like a senior researcher at a tech company, right? And a lot of my work actually involves understanding people, understanding their mindset towards technology. If they are using a specific piece of technology, how are they using it? What are their needs? And how can it be improved? And a lot of this involves like talking to people, understanding what are their motivations and barriers. Now this skill actually directly trickled into my curiosity, where I was trying to understand, why do animals exist on this planet? What is the relationship between humans and animals? And why are some relationships like companion based or love based, whereas others are like very transactional, where we end up, I guess exploitation is the true word, but that's where we are headed. We are headed to a world where it's more of a transactional relationship, as opposed to like, hey, I really, your existence on this planet matters, and let's coexist together. That kind of mindset is slowly fading away. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is like, my skills are like talking to people, trying to understand what's going on, kind of trickled into answering a lot of my questions that were just out of genuine curiosity. And eventually I landed at a point where I was like, huh, there's actually a gap here. And it's not that nobody else is trying to create awareness or anything. It's just that I wanted to do it in my own way. So
Preeti, you mentioned curiosity, and I think that's such an important thing to have. I think a lot of people, once they get outside of primary education, don't ask a whole lot more questions. It's kind of go to your day job, do this, work, and of course, raise a family, all that great stuff. But I think a lot of times we're missing that extra level of curiosity. Growing up, were you always curious?
yeah, I think in general, the environment in which I grew up, it was okay to ask questions, right? It's not like I ask a question and then I am shut off. Of course, some of my questions, if my family or friends or even just acquaintances, if they didn't know the answer, or if I was asking the wrong question, sometimes I was told that, hey, we don't know the answer to this question, and this is probably something that we can explore, or try and identify what the answer could be. So there was definitely that level of encouragement, and I think that's what kept that idea of being curious going up until today.
I appreciate that. So, you mentioned you start the nonprofit. What was that first experience like? It's one thing to ask questions, and a lot of people might do their research, look it up, but what pushed you to that next level of really trying to understand even deeper?
Yeah, I think it was definitely an unknown for me, right? Like, I have in my career worked for nonprofits in the past, and I know, as an employee for a nonprofit, I know that funding can be very limited, and that can actually make you a little bit risk averse, and you're not necessarily um, exploring something in a holistic manner. So I knew very well that early on, raising funds is going to be very, very difficult for what I wanted to do. But even before that, the question was, what do I actually want to do? Right? And a lot of that was informed by my journeys and travels to a lot of animal sanctuaries, and talking to people who are in the space of animal welfare and animal rights, because that helped me inform that, to a greater extent, the focus is not super holistic, right? So the foundation to all of this is really, we need to awaken love. Love is very much present within everybody, irrespective of whether you are human animal or a non-human animal, right? But then in some places it is a little bit dormant because of the way we prioritize or see things in life. It is influenced by our environment, what we have access to, and also what we are exposed to, and that can actually influence how we act as consumers on this planet, right? And by consumer, it's not just food, it's actually beyond that, right? It's about the clothing we wear, the products we use every day, how we interact with nature. All of that really matters. With so much of noise, so much of technology today, we can get really distracted as humans, and we get so pulled into like, okay, what is it for me, my health, my well-being, my family, my friend and community, and then it kind of stops there, right? And it doesn't go across species. Like, we don't start to think about what does this mean for other beings on this planet, like animals, bees, insects, trees, and so on, right? So I found that that knowledge was, it was there. It is very much there. I'm by no means like pulling things out of air or anything. It's just that I felt like that information is not being exposed to people in a holistic manner. A lot of times it's either missing or it is super extreme, where we are exposed to content that is like, of an animal being killed and things like that, right? So really, the if we can awaken that love, we are actually doing a lot of good, not only for ourselves but also for other beings and for the entire planet. So that's where I kind of formed my thesis, which was like, hey, perhaps that's where I can contribute, is like, can I actually help people awaken self-love, love for others, love for other species? And the next question was like, okay, then how do I do that? Because there are so many different faith systems, there's so many different practices. Even today, it's a little bit difficult to get the message to people, because um, when I talk about love, everybody is like, yeah, love is love. Like it is not influenced by faith or practices, right? It's one word or one act that can be done or can be expressed in a way that everybody can understand. The challenge is the languages differ, right? So then how do we actually standardize it in such a way that people understand that everybody is kind, everybody is coming with good intent. It's just that sometimes the situations can cause, or sometimes desires that people have for consuming something can affect another being. And so I started to think, well, can I do a little bit of like education and awareness programs? Like, can I write books and reach children that way? Because one thing I started to observe very early on in my journey is that children at a very young age, they actually have the capacity to empathize with other beings, to take their perspectives, and form that emotional connection. However, they're often only exposed to a small subset of the world. Yeah, they're exposed to, of course, companion animals, and then they are exposed to facilities like zoos and so on, like a like aquarium, where animals are actually kept captive. And they're also exposed to like content like cartoons and comics, where animals are in this form of like, they are like in a very fuzzy setup, they're wearing aprons, they're cute and everything. But eventually, as they grow up, they see a different world where these animals sometimes end up becoming their food, being part of their clothing, the products that they use, the beauty industry, cosmetics and medicines and so on. And once they've grown up, they actually now have to face a new world, where they are trying to figure out, oh, by consuming some of these products, it's actually not good for my physical and mental well-being. It's also not bad, it's also not good for my spiritual being. How do I actually relearn everything? And that's when the challenge actually is really difficult for a lot of adults. It's like they need to unlearn everything they learned as a child. And as a child, they are actually taught that it's okay to not have some of these animals in their compassion circle. It's okay that some lives don't matter. And that actually trickles into how children grow up to be good citizens on this planet, right? Like, even treating other fellow human beings, it becomes a huge challenge, because they have been taught as a child that some beings matter less. Right? So all of this kind of like made me feel like, okay, I really need to talk to children, talk to families, somehow engage them in these conversations. How about I write books, I speak at places, and also like conduct workshops. That was like my first thing. The second thing I started to run into was more like, okay, so I'm doing all of this, I don't know how much of an impact this is having, because a lot of what I'm trying to do is value based education. Now, one way you can actually track an impact is, let's say you're offering education to a child, they get a degree in computer science, for instance, and then they get a job. Then you, as a nonprofit, can say, see, I actually enabled a child to get a job, and that's impactful. But then when it comes to value based education, it's not a metric that you can measure. Like, it's actually the well being of that human. It's how well that human thinks of themselves as a participant on this planet. And then it's very difficult to measure that or show an impact. So that's a challenge that I'm still kind of, it was very unknown in the beginning. It is still a little bit of an unknown thing that I'm still trying to tackle. And also, it also happens to be a challenge when it comes to raising funds, right? If I went and told someone, can you fund a project that will sponsor workshops for children that is based on value based education, they're going to be like, huh, what's the outcome? So the outcome I can say is it'll lead to a better, kinder planet with better citizens who are kind and generous, compassionate, grateful, and forgiving. But how do I measure that is something that I'm still trying to figure out. The second thing that I really ran into was like, can I also have impact on the lives of animals directly? Because there are a lot of sanctuaries across the globe that are in the space of creating experiences that are immersive, right? So families and adults, they can go to these locations, they can actually see how rescued animals are sentient, they have emotions just like how we do, and in their presence, how you make that connection between human and animal, and in that moment you actually understand what love is. And it's not like a one off thing, right? It's like my hypothesis, or what I really advocate for is that when you volunteer at these locations and when you are repetitively putting yourself in front of the animals, you actually observe how they are behaving. They have gone through a lot of trauma. They may have lost a limb, for instance, right? Or they may have an issue with their body, but they are still able to accept life as is and be so content with it. And that's something that we as humans need to learn, because today there's so much of social media content. We are looking at other people's life, we are comparing like, hey, am I why is my life like this? Why can't I earn more? Why can't I be better? um, so that aspect of being content is super important for our well-being, because you are going to be disease free right away. Mentally you're going to feel so clear, you're going to have so much clarity that you actually know what you need to do next. There will be challenges, it's not that you're never good, life is all about challenges, right? But then you at least have that courage to face the world, and spiritually you sort of elevate your consciousness to be a much higher soul, who is able to help others, who's able to help yourself, and so on, right? So I really wanted to support these locations and bring more families there and sort of engage them in this idea of, can you actually give to the world? Because the more you give, the universe is going to bring it back to you. It may not come back from that same setting, right? It may come back in a different way. But this idea of servitude is so important for every being on this planet, because we are all at a very, very core level servants. To give you an example, for someone who's just thinking about themselves, they are serving themselves. They are still a servant, right? If they are, let's say, serving their family, like their parent, their caregiver, they're serving someone else, and they're doing it in a manner where they are not trying to expect anything in return, right? And that's super important, because that really helps a person develop compassion and empathy and also be kind to others. And in turn, what it does is it actually helps them feel grounded, helps them feel like content, and all of that is like, it's all going to lead to like a positive domino effect. So I started creating initiatives where I would raise funds to support these sanctuaries, so that the animals at these sanctuaries are taken care of well. So right now we have been supporting three grassroots level sanctuaries in India, but we are going to scale to other parts of the world very soon. The idea being, again, this concept of someone, a donor, supporting an organization. A lot of times you make a donation, you're actually not going to know what happens to the money you actually donated. So that's where I thought, okay, I'm in tech space, can I actually disrupt this space a little bit? So using technology, we are trying to create a transparent donation system where a person, when they make a contribution, they actually know how every cent of that contribution was used. And then they get an update from the organization that's taking care of animals with like an itemized list of, these were the items that were purchased using your contribution, and this is how it was taken care of for supporting the animals. And then the last piece is, again, like going back to technology, I have found that a lot of these grassroots animal welfare nonprofits, they have a tough time to keep their head above the water, right? So they are actually on the ground trying to rescue animals, sometimes caring for the animals. Taking care of animals is not easy. It takes a huge village. It's very similar to taking care of a human, right? So if you have a baby, there's so much that you'll have to be prepared for, like the healthcare, the food and cleanliness, hygiene, all of it, right? So it's very very similar for animals just like humans. And all of that takes a lot of time, effort, and money. But and what that does is it doesn't really expose the organization to the general public. So I'm starting to build technology so that it's easy for people to visit these places, get very connected with them, so that they are invested in them, right? So befriend cows, my nonprofit, will serve as a platform that will connect families to sanctuaries at a global level, because then communities start to build that love, they start to build relationships with these animals, and they be so invested in this concept that eventually it'll trickle into how they are as a consumer. So they're going to start to think, do I need this product? What does this product contain? If it is coming out of abuse or cruelty, do I actually need it? Can I find an alternative that's similar to this, that doesn't involve cruelty and exploitation? And that way I'm actually doing what I have to do as a kind citizen. So that's like in a nutshell, that was the whole thing. It very much in the beginning when I started, it was a huge unknown for me, because I was like, okay, I really don't know what I'm getting into. But I'm slowly starting to see a few more unknown doors open up, and I'm trying to figure out which one to go towards or go through. So
Preethi, I appreciate that you mentioned about children and growing up. You don't really, I mean, I think children do have so much more compassion for everything from animals, but I think a lot of it is how you are raised. Of course, a lot of people, as children, they love their cat, they love their dog, and, maybe some peripheral other animals that they know of, depending on where they grew up. But I think as you get older, you start to not really think about it as much, to be honest. And then as you mentioned, we either know nothing as adults or young adults or however you want to phrase it, or it's the extreme. You see, those shock kind of commercials, and I understand what they're doing, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, it's almost like the 24-hour news cycle. I feel like eventually you start to kind of turn your brain off, or at least turn your senses down to things like that. And so
mhm.
finding a healthy balance of being more informed, I think, is crucial.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, totally agree. And the other thing also is there are definitely a significant amount of people I've met in my journey who watched a documentary film, and then overnight they just changed how they approach life, right? But you see, there are different personalities, different characteristics for every individual. Some people get really emotionally affected when they watch such kind of content, right? And so we need to find that balance, and depending on the persona of the person, we may have to like sort of engage in discussions like this, because it's not just one type of animals, right? So yes, there are companion animals, but there are also working animals, farm animals, and wild animals. And today, right now as we speak, we don't know how many of these animals are being subject to cruelty or actually being killed in this very moment. And there are a lot of people, it's not even top of mind for them, right? They are not exposed to this kind of content. And a lot of times when you're purchasing something, let's say you're going to a mall to purchase something, it's not even like, where did this product come from? What is the company, what are their values, and what is their mission? And because of that, we have so much of products that we use, and we only use it for a short period of time, right? So the one thing that I was shocked by, between, in terms of cultures, like, because I'm from India, I don't know if that's the case, if that's true in India overall. I cannot generalize, right? But I can talk about myself and my family. We try to use a product to the end of its cycle, right? It's not that we kind of use it once and throw it. And even after it is, let's say, broken or torn, we try to stitch it up or fix it, right? And then continue to use it. So that way we are generating less of a waste. But today, there's so much waste that we have created. There's so much plastics. There's plastic in our brain because of how we have been consuming. There's plastic in our lungs and heart. And so it's super important for us to wake up now, and try to deal with this, because if we let even another decade pass by, our future generation is going to struggle a lot. And that's why, I really want to engage with families to start with, because that way people tend to recognize that, oh, it's important. To give you an example, one simple thing, right? So if you, for children who are working on arts and crafts, they're using paint and paintbrush, and then they are, like they're working on some artwork. Now the paint has plastic. So how many families actually think when they are purchasing the paint that, is this something I want my child to use? They do look for labels like, is this child safe, and skin safe and things like that. But what about the other ingredients that are in the paint? Can we actually go back to our roots, where we can use maybe pigments that are naturally obtained from the earth, mix it with water, and then make paint that way? And can we use that? Because any unused paint usually goes down the drain. Right, so you're putting it down your kitchen, or your bathroom, and then it enters into the ocean, and that's how, there's more and more plastic. So even as simple as that, just talking to people that, hey, this can be a great swap, I think that makes a huge difference.
I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the things you mentioned earlier was the fact that it's often tough for nonprofits to get that value based education. Of course, as you mentioned in the tech space, it's a lot more simple. It's, hey, we did this, we offered this internship, we're able to give this person this job. And I come from the humanities, the history area. So I've worked in nonprofits a good portion of most of my professional career. And it is tough a lot of times to have a potential donor or sponsor really wrap their head around why is it important for inner city kids to learn history. Well, you
Mhm.
see, they know themselves better, they know their history better. Maybe it's less of a story of oppression and more of just what really went on in history. And so I think one of those things is I appreciated how you talked with or started to talk with the sanctuaries, another way to get families involved. And of course, then the family can kind of see where their dollar is going with donating to those specific organizations.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, on everyone's journey, you make a decision not really knowing the outcome. Can you give me a time you made a decision and just went for it?
Yes, it was the one where I was, I was trying to make, raise funds for these grassroots organizations, right? I had no idea if anybody would trust me to start with, right? Because even before I set up the nonprofit, for quite some time, I started talking to people about how, like, for instance, in India, it's a very complicated space, right? In India, cows, for instance, they are revered as mothers. But even though on a faith level, we sort of associate, religion, and we sort of associate love and, protection of that species. When it comes to consumption, India happens to be the leading producer of dairy, also leading consumer of dairy. Now the problem with that is there's a huge demand for dairy products, right? Like milk, cheese, paneer, and so on. uh, because there's a huge demand, to meet that, the supply has to go up. And to be able to do that, India started doing something like a factory farming, right? Literally artificially producing these beings at a mass scale, so that they can be a huge supply of dairy. But what this does is, it first of all, it takes us into this transactional exploitative relationship. Second is, whenever the cow goes dry, she's no longer needed, and so she automatically enters into the leather and meat industry, which is why India also happens to be leading producer of beef and leather. Now, if you look at this, this is a huge complication for a child growing up in the country, because on the one side, they're growing up in a family where the family may like, oh, you need to pray and, pay your respects to the cow. When you see her at a temple or in the street, you feed her something. But on the other end, you're also consuming these dairy products. You're incorporating this at a huge level, right? Every meal has to have it. And so in the child's mind, they don't make that connection that me consuming a lot of dairy is actually leading to the harm of the animal. On the other hand, I'm also saying I respect her and I love her and I pray her and everything, right? So I guess my unknown was like, so I started spreading this message, and I would talk to people and I would tell them about this, and they're like, nobody would believe me when I told them this, right? And this was before some of the most well-known recent documentaries came out, right? And there's a lot of academic research in this space, by the way. It's just that people don't read the academic research, right? So and I would talk to people and they'll be like, yeah, because I have that sentiment for cows, I may give you like $10, $15 here and there. Um, that and for me, I was like, I really wanted a structure, right? Which is why I even set up a nonprofit, because I thought that way I can give more transparency to people and be more trustworthy. And also, it will give me the space to keep the donors informed, right? It's almost like a community that I'm building. It also gives me the opportunity to look for more grants and write proposals and approach it that way. My huge unknown was that even if I'm doing this, are people actually going to support this effort, right? If I were to go to someone and said, hey, here I'm supporting like three of these organizations, this is the work that they're doing, this is how much their monthly needs are, and I'm going to use technology in this specific manner to sort of help with the whole process, are they even going to support me, right? But I was pleasantly surprised when I actually came across people who said, hey, I actually am going to believe you. Of course, it doesn't mean I completely trust you. I will make a donation. You show me what you're going to do with that money. And once you do that, you have looped me in as your recurring, support. And so I guess that's where I think it became really it became real for me that there are definitely people who are, if we are honest about what's happening and we give that transparency. And I started sharing updates, regular updates of how the animals at these sanctuaries were doing and things like that, right? So when that community is built, it's something that we can engage them in a conversation and have them to continue to support. So today, the donors, they actually know some of the animals at these sanctuaries so much that in future, if they decide to visit India, they can. There's a high chance that they may want to go visit the animal, right? So even though they haven't met the animal in person, they have no idea if this sanctuary even exists, right? They are just believing what I'm saying, and that I think was a pleasant surprise for me. And I really hope that I continue to offer that transparency and that keep building that trust, because this is not a one person's work, right? So it's the entire world needs to come together to have that understanding that yes, humans are, they have much more capabilities, but that doesn't mean that they can express power or exploit other beings. In fact, it's on the flip side. In my experiences at volunteering and being around animals, I have come to understand that animals are much more smarter. They have much more of an empathy. Their emotional intelligence is much higher than some of us humans. So,
Pretty, I couldn't agree more. Title of the podcast, Into the Unknown. And you mentioned a lot of the unknowns and things you've been working on. Where can people learn more about your organization, what you do?
they can definitely find me on the website differentcows.org. I do have a social media presence, more active on Instagram and YouTube, also on Facebook, not so much on other platforms. I'm getting there. We are a very very small team that is completely volunteer led, right? So we don't take salaries or anything, and because of that, it's really us trying to figure out and work during like evening hours or sometimes late nights, early mornings, or weekends, to do something that we can, right? It's not that we are going to change the world or anything, but it's whoever we can reach. If we can change even the heart of one person, I think that's a huge win for us.
I couldn't agree more. I can't wait to learn more and see your journey continue to unfold. I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope your listeners, viewers, would like what we spoke about as well. Feel free to reach out to me. There is a way you can reach out to me from the website. If you want to check out the books, that's also there on the website. If you want to help sponsor any of the work that I'm doing, again, feel free to reach out.
Talk soon.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
That was another fun episode of Into the Unknown. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen. And if it provides you any value or entertainment, I would love if you shared it with others, liked, subscribed, and really just help the podcast grow. Again, tell a friend, tell a foe, just anyone who might enjoy hearing some stories of people's own journeys and what got them to where they are today. Till next time.